This is my retrospective for Nioh 2, a game that was developed by Team Ninja and published by Koei Tecmo, which is the Dead or Alive series developer and publisher, respectively. And this is the sequel to 2017's Nioh, which is a game that I did play. I did complete that game, and I did upload a retrospective for that game. This is really not much different from the first game. And I also don't understand, once again, why this game got the high scores that it got. Because IGN gave this game a 9 out of 10, and I was also seeing similar scores across the spectrum from your typical ignorant video game journalists. And this is why I discuss video games. This is why I made a channel discussing entertainment, because I don't agree with the high scores. This is not a good video game. This is a horrible video game. It's not a good game. It's not a fun game, for one. It's not a fun experience, and it's not a fair challenge from start to finish. Now, the game isn't completely hopeless. There are good things about Nioh 2, but they're the same things that were good about the first game. Basically, everything that was good about Nioh 1 is good about Nioh 2, and everything that was bad about Nioh 1 is bad in Nioh 2. So, let me start off with some of the good points, the pros. Graphics. Graphically, the game looks good. Is it the most amazing thing ever? Is it the best thing that you'll find on the market? No, but it does look in line with other modern AAA video games. So, graphically, the game is on point. Controls. For the most part, the game does control well. It's pretty responsive. The combat system is a different story, but I'll get to that. And the sheer amount of content that's in this game, which was pretty much the saving grace of the first game. This game has, and the first game as well, has more content than your typical average AAA game. So that's another good point. Now I'm going to get into what's not good. First of all, the story. The story in this game is just dumb as hell. It doesn't make any sense. It's very strange. It has that uncanny valley effect to it, because most of the characters are talking in a different language by default. This is a choice that the developers made, and I don't speak Japanese, and so I wasn't able to engage with the story or the characters, none of which I cared about in this game, although it was interesting seeing William in the game, the protagonist from the first Nioh, which you're seeing on screen. What you're seeing on screen right now is actually me playing through the final level of the game, the final main mission. That was interesting, but yeah, I didn't care about any of the characters in this game. The game has this character creation simulator, very similar to Code Vein, and similar to Code Vein, the character creation simulator is good. It's one of the highlights of the game, but considering the fact that you don't give a shit about the character that you create, it's rather pointless. And it seems like they just threw it in just to add more quote-unquote customization and give the player more options. So pretty much it's unnecessary, and it could have been left out on the cutting room floor. Another thing that's weak in the game is the combat system itself, which is a big detriment to the game because this is a combat-heavy game. Clearly the story is not the main highlight here. The main highlight is the combat. And the combat works exactly the same way as it did in Nioh 1. This is a Dark Souls clone, a clone of Dark Souls. It has the same controls and everything, and mechanically it's very, very similar to the Souls games. The difference between the Nioh games and the Souls games is that Nioh is more combo heavy than what you find in Dark Souls, and so there's more of a chance to pull off combos in the game with the different weapons that are available. And that was enjoyable about Nioh 1, but just like Nioh 1, the problem is that because they have this stance system in the game where you can change between different three different stances in the game. The best stance for the weapons that I used, which is the axe and the odachi, the best stance for those weapons is the low stance. And the low stance is actually the fastest stance in the game. You can quickly pull off, a quick series of attacks in succession using the low stance. And you're going to need to be quick in this game if you want to get through it, successfully. And so I rarely ever used the high stance, and I almost never used the mid stance. And so the stance system feels like it was just tacked on, similar to the character creation simulator. And this was also a problem in Nioh 1 as well. Now, another issue, and why I chose to upload footage of the final level of the game, is the level design. Now, the level design I felt was a highlight in Nioh 1. The levels were very complex, like the level design, and it kind of helped elevate the game compared to, other games where the level design isn't as complex or deep and intricate in the way you navigate, through the different environments in the game. However, in Nioh 2, the levels have two main issues, quite a number of them. Well, three main issues. The first is that they're too long. Some of the missions in the game can last anywhere between an hour, 40 minutes to an hour. And that's before you get to the boss of the level. Then you have to struggle through the boss, defeating the boss for each stage. Yeah, that got on my nerves after a while, because this is not a short game. Similar to Nioh 1, it's a pretty long game. I beat the game in 56 hours. It's a little bit shorter than Nioh 1, or maybe that could be that I'm actually skilled at playing these types of games, considering I played, through multiple Souls games and Souls clones, or whatever the case. So I already knew what to do, as soon as I started playing it. But yeah, this is still a long game at over 50 hours long, in length. Yeah, the level design just got on my nerves. Some of the levels, especially the one that you're seeing on screen, just turned out to be this complex maze that's just it's not fun to navigate, considering the game is already super repetitive, because, the enemies are designed to kill you. And I died plenty of times in this game, to the point where you constantly have to retrace your steps and backtrack. It just got on my nerves. So that's one problem with the level design, is that the levels are too long. Another issue with the level design is the enemy placement. And I'm going to talk more about the enemies later. You have enemies that are placed at specific points that just really don't make any sense. It's like Team Ninja just said, let's randomly put this enemy here. Let's randomly put this particular enemy in this spot. And none of it really feels like it really makes any sense from a design standpoint. And I'm not really sure, why certain enemies were placed in specific areas. Yeah, that's something else that got on my nerves with the levels in this game. But the biggest problem with the level design, and it feeds into what the biggest problem is with Nioh 2, is the fact that the levels are actually reused multiple times. So basically, you have a handful of levels or whatever that are used for the main missions. And basically, those levels are reused with different backdrops, different times of day. You can have one level that takes place during probably midday, and then later you'll encounter a side mission that uses the exact same level. It seems like it takes place during, the evening or whatever the case. That's called copy-paste game design, and that's lazy. And it got on my nerves, because there's a lot more side missions in the game than there are main missions. I believe there's only a little over 20 main missions in the game. If you include all the side missions, that number stretches exponentially. And so That's a big problem with the levels in this game. Now I'm going to talk about the enemies, and this is where I really start to have an issue with Nioh 2. The fucking enemies in this game are ripped straight from the first game, and it's like, well, tons of games do that, but it's like there's almost no new enemy types in this game. Every single enemy that's in this game was in Nioh 1, somewhere in Nioh 1. Most of them are in the main game in Nioh 1, and then some of them appear in the DLC that was released for Nioh 1. I don't know if there's actually any new enemy NPCs in this game other than the bosses. That's a big problem. And this feeds into, once again, what the big problem is with this game and why I feel like this should not have gotten the high review scores that it got. Then you have the way the enemies are designed. And this is an issue I have with pretty much all the Souls games. The enemies in the game are designed to kill you. They have attacks in the game where the enemies are so quick in their movement and their attacks cover so much range that it actually goes against the basic movement of the overall game as far as what the player can actually do to defend themselves. And your character moves so slow and sluggish compared to basically all of the enemy NPCs that are in the game that it feels like at multiple times throughout the game that no matter what you do on the controller, you're just on the losing side, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do to counter what you're actually facing. And then another big issue that I have is that the Souls combat system is not designed. This isn't Devil May Cry where the combat system is designed for you to take on multiple opponents on screen at once. The Souls combat system is designed for the player to take on one target and one target only. But this game throws several different enemies at you at once, multiple times throughout the runtime of the game. And that makes the game a lot more frustrating because it becomes a mess when you have to deal with more than one opponent on screen. And they tried to remedy this by throwing in the opportunity for the player to, summon other players if you're playing the game online, or for the player to summon what's called an acolyte, which is an AI-controlled co-op companion. The problem with the summoning system, be it if you're trying to summon an actual player, is the fact that most players are not going to make it through this game or make it very far in this game simply because of the difficulty and the way the enemies are designed. Most people are not going to make it very far playing Nioh 2, and this is not a game for casual players. It's a game for pretty much the most hardcore RPG fanatics. And so if you're able to make it to the later levels of the game, you're not going to find a whole lot of people to summon to help you if that's what you choose to do. Another problem is the acolyte system. If you want to summon an AI companion, that requires something called a choco cup, and that item is only dropped by defeating these revenants, which are these red character sprites, these red graves or whatever that you'll see here and there throughout the game, and you just walk up to them and hold down the circle button, and that'll summon an enemy NPC that's in the form of another player. And if you defeat them, most of the time they'll drop around 2 of these choco cups. That's what you use to summon an acolyte. But the problem is that most of the time the acolytes require anywhere from 3 to 5, sometimes more than that, of these choco cups. And once you run out of them, well, you'll just have to grind for more. And so you really have to make use of your AI controlled companion while they're on screen, because once you use them, they disappear and you can't summon them again unless you die before their time has elapsed. And another problem is that the AI controlled companion, they're useful to a certain degree, but they still suffer from what many video games suffer from when it comes to the intelligence of the AI, where the AI is not playing the game the way you want them to, and you have no control over them. There's dozens upon dozens of video games that have that issue, and it's especially a problem in Nioh 2 because of the difficulty. All of these things just make the game extremely frustrating to play. Then you have the bosses that are in the game, and once again, the boss characters are overpowered. When you reach the later levels in the game, a lot of the bosses can kill you in 2 hits. And then if you want to use a healing item, and all of the Souls games suffer from this, if you want to use a healing item, your character takes a fucking eternity and then some to use a healing item. So sometimes, you'll try and use a healing item at the wrong time. The bosses are just completely random in their behavior. They can use pretty much any attack at any given time, instantly kill you in 1 or 2 hits. And a lot of the enemies in the game, including the standard enemies, just have these one shot attacks where it's a 1 hit kill. And 1 hit kill attacks in video games is just bullshit. It's bad game design. That's something that should be abolished in pretty much any video game that's released in the industry, because there's no reason for it. It's an artificial way to increase the difficulty and make it harder on the player. And the game developers, wonder why their game doesn't sell more than a few million copies, because no one wants to play that garbage. No one wants to play that kind of thing or suffer through that kind of thing because it's not fun. And there's plenty of that in Nioh 2. There's plenty of attacks that are, 1 hit kill, attacks. There's plenty of instances where they have multiple enemies on screen. Some of them are out of view. Some enemies are up on a platform shooting at you, and then you have another enemy on the ground trying to fight you, and you're just struggling with this combat system because it's not designed, once again, for that. This is a game that's intended for the person to play solo, even though you can, play with NPC companions here and there throughout the game, even though you can summon other players and acolytes. The game is designed for you to really go through it alone. Like I said, it's not a fun experience at all. And I'm like, I don't understand why people like games like this. I don't find games like this fun. With Nioh 2 in particular, there is one saving grace in the game, which allowed me to get through it. It made the game a lot easier and actually a lot more enjoyable at certain points throughout the game. They added in a new mechanic that wasn't in Nioh 1, where you can use the abilities of the enemy NPCs, and basically it's called soul cores. Like if you defeat a certain number of a certain enemy type, they'll drop something that's known as a soul core, and you attune the soul cores or whatever. You can level them up by fusing them together. Like if you have 2 of the same type of soul core, you can combine them, which will level up, that soul core and make that attack stronger, even though it'll cost more meter to use. The one I primarily use throughout the game, like the moment I started using it, I just stuck with it because it was that effective, is because the bosses also drop them as well. And the one I used is the Yatsu no Kami boss. That soul core is very effective because it summons that boss, and that boss will strike that whatever your target is multiple times in a row. And you can also use these attacks in boss fights as well. And basically what it does is it helps you stagger the enemies, because all the enemies in the game have a stagger bar. And once you stagger them, they become vulnerable for a few seconds, and that's extremely effective if you know how to manipulate the system. And so that was the saving grace of this game, because Team Ninja intentionally went through and made the game just extremely difficult throughout the entire thing. Without that mechanic, I would not have gotten through this game successfully. I probably would have quit somewhere early on. That mechanic is extremely important. It's actually detrimental if anyone is trying to play this game and become good at it. The last thing I will talk about is the Dark Realm, the Yokai Dark Realm. They added in this thing in the game, and it's some of the worst game design that I've ever seen in a video game, where they have this thing in the game where at multiple points throughout the game you'll enter this area that's grayed out. It completely washes out the colors in the environment, and basically when you're in this so-called dark realm, it's just this big gray area. What it does is that it drastically slows down your stamina, as far as how fast your stamina replenishes. And the entire game, as far as what the player can do, is dependent on this stamina meter. That is another mechanic that was ripped from the Souls games. And while you're in the Dark Realm, these areas severely limit what you can do as far as offense or defense. This is a prime example of artificial difficulty at its worst, and the only way to get rid of these dark areas is to defeat a specific enemy that's in the Dark Realm. The only way that you can do that is you have to go through these dark grayed out areas, and you have to essentially hunt for whatever the enemy is that you're supposed to kill, so you can get rid of the Dark Realm, which makes navigation easier. They even block off save points in these areas, so they essentially force you to play through these sections in the game, and it's horrible. It's terrible game design. It's bad level design. It's artificial difficulty at its worst, and yeah, it's just it's not fun. It's not enjoyable. It's not engaging. It doesn't force the player to think about what they're doing. It's just nonsense. That's basically what it is. Yeah, the Nioh 2, this game is for a very specific type of person. It's, like I said, it's not for casual gamers. I wouldn't even say this is for hardcore gamers. This game is for masochists. This is a game for people who enjoy dying over and over again. This goes beyond, I want a difficult challenge. This type of game enters into the territory of, let's just make a game as hard as possible and make these mechanics that severely limit what the player is able to do. Yeah, I don't think this is a good game at all. I'd say this is easily the worst video game that's come out this year. It's extremely overrated, and this is just another one of those games similar to the Souls games, Sekiro, Code Vein, all of those games, and a lot worse, because even those games don't have some of the bullshit mechanics that are found in the Nioh games. And Nioh 2 in particular just takes it too far in several different areas. Yeah, I can't recommend this game. And then the whole repetition of the game, the copy paste design of the levels and the enemy NPCs that are in the game, as well as the endless series of menus and shit that you're not going to read, because it's just like, why is this here, why is that there. I can't recommend it. It's a very odd game. It's a very strange game, and yeah, I didn't enjoy playing it even when I was winning, and that says a lot. So that's my retrospective for Nioh 2, and I will be doing 2 more retrospectives for Dragon Ball Z Kakarot and Doom Eternal, and later the Final Fantasy VII Remake that's coming, but I'm still playing through that. So that's what's coming.